So how does unification actually start? So under Cavour's leadership, again, remember he's the prime minister under Victor Emmanuel in Sardinia and Piedmont. He's going to start in the northern and central areas, which makes sense because look where Cavour is. He's here in Piedmont, and these are the areas he's going to be focusing on first, closest to him. Okay, areas that are going to be more influenced by Italian movements for unifications than the South. All right, so how does he do that? He actually does this by rallying the support of some other countries. All right, so remember the previous section of the chapter, well, actually it wasn't in the chapter. Remember, we had this supplementary section on the Crimean War. I did mention that Italy got involved, but I didn't really explain why. That's because I wanted to reserve that for today, because it's a political strategy. All right, what Italy thinks is if it joins in with France and Britain against Russia in the Crimean War, then it's going to get some support from these two countries in case they need it in the future. All right, so actually Britain doesn't really get involved in Italian unification, but France does. France is going to become a very significant alliance for Italy, so that when they start to rally and particularly try to get the Austrians out of some of their previous provinces, right? Like previous provinces, that is. So remember again, I keep going back to this map, but remember Lombardy and Venetia are part of Austria at this point. So if Italy wants to get Austria out of Lombardy and Venetia, it needs another country to help them. It's going to look towards France. All right. So actually, this alliance with France is going to be a secret one, um, and the kind of promise that is made here is that Napoleon III of France says he's going to support Italy, Sardinia in particular. If they go to war with Austria, he says, all right, we're going to help you go to war with Austria and help you create a northern Italian kingdom. Now, France obviously needs to get something out of this agreement. Otherwise, they would never, just out of the goodness of their heart, decide to support this Sardinian war against Austria. So they actually, if this happens successfully, if Italy gets this land, Italy will give the provinces of Nice and Savoy to France. So checking out the map, these two areas here, which were part of Italy beforehand, would become part of France if this movement against Austria was successful. So now they have to figure out how to go to war with Austria. Basically, Sardinia is going to try to provoke the Austrians to going into war. This is in 1859. How do they provoke them? Well, realize that even though Austria is controlling Lombardy and Venice, the people that live there are still Italian. So what Cavour does and what other Sardinians do is they start to kind of stir up nationalist activity in Lombardy. They kind of say, how do you feel about the fact that you're ruled by Austrians? You don't like it, right? Don't you want to join Italy again? Here's some guns. Why don't you start to stir up some trouble? So because of this nationalistic activity that starts to stir up in Lombardy in particular, this provokes Austria and they declare war on Sardinia. So how does this war with Austria pan out? Well, again, we already said that there's this secret alliance with France, which helps at first, okay? But so it helps the beginning. It's going to allow Italy to at least secure Lombardy. So Italy's going to add some territory to the map, all right, right next to Sardinia. So that's good. They do not get Venice, however. Why not? Well, because France pulls out of the war before it's over. And why would France do that? Well, as you see here, they enter into a separate peace with Austria. Why would they do that? There's a couple of things. First off, France has other kind of preoccupations. They're very nervous that there is going to be a war with Prussia, which does eventually happen, and Prussia is going to totally cream France. All right, so they kind of feel like they need to shift their attention more towards the threat in Prussia to the, I guess, to the north, or to their eastern border, and they can't really assist Italy anymore when they have their own problems. Also, Austria is really strong militarily, so they're kind of scared that they're going to lose. They also really don't like the revolutionary unrest that's taking place in northern Italy. And also, excuse me, the Austrians are Catholic. And so it kind of puts France in an awkward position because, as far as religion is concerned, you would think that France and Austria would be allies. Um, but at the same time, you know, this is a war that's fought much more for political reasons. So, so basically, this is the French public that are looking at Napoleon III and saying, "Why are you going to war with this other Catholic country? That doesn't make any sense." All right, so France decides to pull out. They have a separate peace with Austria, and this makes Cavour so angry that he actually resigns temporarily. But temporarily is the key word. Okay, so what happens after we get Lombardy? Again, remember after this war with Austria, Italy only gets Lombardy, not Venice. Um, this is going to inspire some nationalistic sentiment in other areas of Italy. Okay, so in northern and central Italy, there's going to be like a huge call for the central states to unify with Sardinia now that Lombardy has joined. They actually encourage Cavour to return after his temporary resignation, and he does. When he returns, he actually agrees to give France Nice and Savoy, that original agreement that they were going to get for France's military assistance. And this is going to be significant because they still want to have France's support. They understand that France has its other military priorities, but they still really want to make sure that France is there for them militarily. And now the unification priority has been shifted more towards central Italy, so Venice isn't as much of an issue here. Um, so basically, because of all this nationalistic activity, and because you see again France jumps back on board when they get Nice and Savoy, we're going to see in 1860 a bunch of new areas join the Kingdom of Sardinia. Sorry, it's really annoying that I keep going back to the map, but I think it's important for us to have a visual. Okay, so we get other areas like Tuscany, Modena here, Parma. Okay, this area up here, Bologna, now in 1860 is all going to join with Sardinia. So now we have to figure out how the South joins in, and it's a very different story at the beginning, partly because it's ruled by it's controlled by a much more romantic movement under Giuseppe Garibaldi. So Garibaldi, you could see, is like is very similar to Mazzini in the sense that he believes that Italy is going to unify through an actual revolution rather than, rather than kind of these movements, I guess, against, these against foreign countries, or this kind of movement to establish a constitution in a much more moderate way. He is not a realpolitik kind of figure. I guess that's the point I'm trying to get at. And so Garibaldi has this group of guerrilla warriors that are called red shirts, which is why I thought this image of Garibaldi was particularly appropriate. You see kind of the revolutionary nature. He's wielding a sword, holding the Italian flag, very nationalistic, and he's wearing a red shirt. And so he starts actually, some people say that he goes up the boot, so to speak, because you know how Italy is shaped like a boot. He starts in Sicily. So in May of 1860, Garibaldi takes 1,000 red shirts and he lands in Sicily. And basically, he's able to rally up all this nationalistic support. He wants to get rid of the Bourbon rule um, from outside of Italy, right? So he basically invades the south. He starts to move up into Naples. And by September of 1860, he has control of Naples and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which again shows us, back to the map, surprise, surprise, how he's able. So he starts out in Sicily, he goes up to the kingdom. He's up here, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. He goes into Naples. So he's starting to get all of southern Italy. So, I mean, this is great in some ways for Cavour because, he has this other military effort to try to get control of parts of Italy that obviously Cavour wants to have all unified at the end. But at the same time, Cavour's scared that Garibaldi is just going to keep taking territory. He's going to continue to advance northward, that he might try to attack Rome, which really scares Cavour because he thinks if Garibaldi attacks Rome, then Austria and France are going to react. They're probably going to come in, intervene. They're going to come to the Pope's defense. So what Cavour does is he tries to kind of hold back Garibaldi from advancing on Rome. So he sends Sardinian troops into the Papal States to keep Garibaldi from going any further. And then also Cavour wants to take the areas that Garibaldi has already freed from the Bourbons and start to organize them politically, organize elections, right? Basically just, secure them under Italian rule. So in a way, Cavour has Garibaldi to thank for getting a lot of these southern territories, but he just doesn't want them to continue to advance in this really, revolutionary, romantic, nationalistic fashion. All right. So actually, eventually, what Cavour does is he arranges a meeting with Garibaldi and with Victor Emmanuel, and he asks Garibaldi to give this land that he has conquered to Sardinia Piedmont, right? And actually, Garibaldi says yes. And so what happens is Sardinia and Piedmont absorb all the conquests that Garibaldi has undertaken. So all of southern Italy is going to come under Sardinia and Piedmont's control. And you could ask, well, why did Garibaldi give in so easily? A lot of it is because he still achieves his goal of unification. All right, so in a way, it's kind of like his nationalistic sentiment is stronger than his Republican sentiment. He wants Italy to be unified, even if it's not in such a liberal fashion. So it shows us that realpolitik, again, is kind of the better strategic method to unify a country. All right. Okay, so kind of finishing up the process here. We have almost all of Italy at this point, except for Rome and Venice. So in 1861, Victor Emmanuel officially becomes the king of all of that territory. Now it's called the Kingdom of Italy. Fast forward to 1866, Italy is going to be at war with Venice, or sorry, what am I talking about? Austria and Prussia are at war, the Austro-Prussian War, and because Italy allies with Prussia, they get rewarded in the end. They get Venice, which remember that was the area that they did not get earlier when they were fighting with Austria. And then lastly, they get Rome when in 1871 a bunch of Italian troops conquer Rome and Rome becomes the capital of Italy. There's one really important thing as far as a takeaway is concerned with Italian unification, however, is that Italy does not unify itself culturally or economically. Now, bear in mind this is actually a more modern map, so don't pay attention to these numbers here. But as far as legacy is concerned, you can still see that there are certain areas of Italy that are still not very heavily populated whatsoever. And notice that with the exception of Rome and Naples, most of southern Italy does not have a very high population. Instead, the area where the population is high is in northern Italy. So Italy really there's a huge social and cultural gap in between the North and the South. This is a really bad stereotype to play on, but when you think about maybe the American perception of an Italian person, they may think more about like a character from the Jersey Shore. Um, and I mean, realize that there's a huge amount of diversity in Italy, literally in terms of even things like skin color. That northern Italy was much more industrialized, southern Italy was much more agricultural, and that actually is why so many Italian Americans you kind of see as identifying more with that southern Italian persona. If you were from an agricultural background, you were far more likely to emigrate. And we'll talk about kind of great migration patterns in a future chapter. But nonetheless, here we are. Italy is unified, even if it is only political. We're going to shift over to Germany next.